修心。
Morning, Bhante. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning.
Morning. Okay.
Ready?
Ready. Okay, let us begin our Met recital first. May all beings be happy and secure. May all beings have happy minds. Whatever living beings there may be, without exception, weak or strong, long, large, medium, short, subtle or gross, visible or invisible, living near or far, born or coming to birth, may all beings have happy minds. Let no one deceive another, nor despise anyone anywhere, neither from anger nor ill will should anyone wish harm to another. As a mother would risk her own life to protect her only child, even so towards all living beings, one should cultivate a boundless heart. One should cultivate for all the world a heart of boundless loving friendliness, above, below, and all around, unobstructed, without hate or resentment, whether standing, walking, sitting, lying down, or whenever awake. One should develop this mindfulness. This is called divinely dwelling here, not falling into erroneous views, but virtuous and endowed with vision, removing desires for sensual pleasures. One comes never again to birth in the womb. With this metta thought in mind, let us continue our practice. As we repeated in the past, we pay total mindful attention to our breath. Mindful attention is the attention without greed, hatred, and delusion, the roots of defilements, roots of suffering, and we don't pay attention to them. Let the mind be free from them and keep the mind pure and clean as we are paying attention to the breath, which also pure and clean. So pure and clean mind unites with the pure and clean breath. And when we breathe in, we notice the breath touching our nostrils and expanding our chest area and expanding our lower abdominal area. They all are very natural happening, and we pay attention to them. As we pay attention to our exhaling, that also we notice with a clear, pure state of mind. As we breathe out, our lower abdomen contract, chest area contract, the breath leaves our nostrils, and then there is a very brief pause between inhaling and exhaling, and we just become aware of it and don't try to dwell upon it, or don't try to manipulate or widen it and so forth. It must be a very natural phenomenon. Those unnecessary conditioning should be forgotten, and that is what the Buddha mentioned in suttas. Amanasikaraniya dhamma amanasikatabhang, manasikaraniya dhamma manasikatabhang. Those dhammas or mental states which are supposed to be forgotten should be forgotten, don't pay attention to them. Those mental states should be remembered, pay attention to them and maintain those mental states. Manasikaraniya, let them be in the mind. What we should let be in the mind is rising and falling, pure and clean mental phenomenon. And that's what we have to keep in mind, not greed, hatred, delusion, not other confusing statements that we might have heard or tried to practice in the past. Let all of them go and keep this pure state of mind. And then you feel the feeling of breath, you perceive the breath, you pay mindful, intentional attention to breath, and you are aware of your breath. These are the aggregates in brief. The breath is the body, feeling is body feeling aggregate, perception is perception aggregate, mental volitional formation, so intentional attention is volitional formation aggregate, and awareness is consciousness aggregate. They are very subtle, and yet we can experience them. While experiencing them, we breathe in and breathe out. This is what is happening to everyone that breathes in and out. When we see this very natural development, we let go of any resentment, any greed that may arise, and let the mind be free from greed. That is one of the hindrances. Then we see that there is nothing to obstruct us, trouble us, because we began with the pure, clear state of mind. So there is no anger or hatred or resentment. Rather, we have a feeling of metta, loving friendliness. And then we do this practice keeping in mind those suffering beings. Whenever we think of suffering beings, compassion arises in our mind. That also is very natural. And then when these three stages are arising, then our restlessness, worry, doubt fade away, and then joy, happiness, and concentration arise. With that concentrated state of mind, we reflect on our own, again, body, feeling, perception, thought, and consciousness, to see them how quickly they change, not for any other reason. We see them changing all the time. As we breathe in, they change. As we breathe out, they change without stopping for a second. They all change all the time. Friends, this is very important message to remember. Not using words, concepts, ideas, but stand above all of them and simply pay mindful attention to your experiences. dukkha patta cha nidukkha bhaya patta cha nibbhaya soka patta cha nisoka hontu sabbe pipanino. May the suffering be free from suffering. May the fear-struck be free from fear. May the grieving be free from grief. So too may all beings be. With this metta wish, we like to start answering questions. There are some questions that my friend will read them for me, and then I try to answer them.
Okay, friends, these questions came via email, so they have priority. And if we run out of these questions, then you can either raise your hand and we'll unmute you to ask Bhante Ji, or you can write your questions in the chat box. Bhante, this question is in regards to happiness. On one occasion, one of my Dhamma teachers, who is a layperson, was honored at a public event by the head of a temple. I was elated and proud of my teacher, so happy that she was honored, and also so inspired by the humble and calm, steady way my teacher conducted herself. I was so happy that I could not hear when an announcement was made immediately after that. I continued feeling very happy until we went to take a photo with my teacher. When I asked my meditation teacher about this, he kind of admonished me that I should not get too excited even when I had joy. He told me I should meditate on the breath instead when I get too elated. So is that the right thing to do? I thought it is wholesome joy, so I like to think of it again and again. Even now, when I remember the event, I still feel very happy for my teacher. Learning the Dhamma and trying to practice has made me overly excited and zealous. When I do something good, I sometimes play it again in my mind. I'm afraid that sometimes there is conceit in it. What should I do?
Yes, your teacher's advice is good advice. You should not get carried away with that. If you feel very happy about what you are doing, and there can be some pride or conceit which is not supposed to be cultivated, and this is the thing that we have to overcome with our right effort. One of the efforts is effort to prevent. Other effort is effort to overcome. This conceit or pride arises without much mindfulness. Therefore, these two must be brought into your mind: mindfulness and right effort. Mindful to recognize that this is not that you are supposed to cultivate, and then the next step is to apply right effort to overcome that pride, and that is what is called effort to prevent, effort to overcome already arisen unwholesome mental state. This is unwholesome mental state. That means be proud or conceit. In ordinary worldly situations, pride is as a place. There, many people say that I'm proud of so and so, proud of myself, proud of my children, and so on and so forth. That is a worldly way of expressing their feeling. But in a spiritual practice, pride is a stumbling block for your practice. Therefore, in order to make yourself humble and simple and accept the reality as it is, that pride or that feeling is not permanent, it is impermanent. So use the right effort to overcome that. That's what I should advise you.
Thank you, Bhante. If mentality and materiality is dependent on consciousness and vice versa, when the body dies, how is consciousness supported until it takes root or attached to another body?
Where consciousness, mental consciousness, consciousness actually we all have studied earlier, are six kind. Here in this case, consciousness, when you talk about the another life or next life and so on, that is the mind consciousness arises through the mental object. At that time, mental object is the vision you, at the moment of death, you may have vision of the place where you are going to take birth. And then that time, the consciousness is supported by desire, greed. And this has been clearly expressed and explained by the Buddha in Aggi Vacchagotta Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. When Vacchagotta asked the Buddha, when the fire goes from one place to another without any fuel here, or without any fuel here, when the fire goes from one place to another, he asked the Buddha what would be the carrier of this fire. Buddha said carrier of this fire is wind. Similarly, when consciousness departs here, from here, it will, its carrier to next life would be desire. And of course, ignorance is there. Where there is a desire, there is ignorance. So these two combine together. This also is another dependent origination situation. Desire is, ignorance is. When the desire disappears, ignorance disappears. When the ignorance is there, desire is there. When ignorance disappears, desire disappears. Like that. So these two always work together. These both are mental states together with the consciousness. Desire and ignorance both are mentality factors, and consciousness is the factor that affects both mentality and materiality. I think at that time that is the carrier, the desire. Desire also is a nourishing root of consciousness. That is why it is called moisture.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah.
Bhante, I think you mostly answered this in 2 talks ago on when you talked about Vedana, feelings. But just to clarify, in the 7 factors of enlightenment, Sati, Dhamma, Vichaya, and Virya, are they perfected one after the other, or are they perfected together at the same time?
Well, they perfected one after the other. For instance, when we develop mindfulness, investigation naturally emerges, and when we do investigation very intensely, very mindfully, effort arises more to be more mindful, and to at that time even our unwholesome states are no longer there. But four types of effort should be applied. When we make effort, tireless effort, then more and more truth emerges, clears, truth becomes clearer, and then joy arises. And then as a result of that, tranquility arises. And so forth, they arise in that order, and it happens so quickly that you cannot isolate them to develop and pick one and develop that separately or specialize in that. But they happen in a sequence. So we follow the sequence.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yeah.
Is an awakened being constantly mindful, concentrated, and conscious of impermanence? Since metta, equanimity, mindfulness, and concentration are also conditioned and impermanent, wouldn't we expect an enlightened being not having them all the time as well?
Well, yes, they are impermanent, surely, but mindfulness continues to exist. You can become mindful of impermanence, and whenever he wants to talk to somebody, his attention would be on the talk, intention, and the words he utters, the purpose of talking, and his intention will shift from previous position to the next. But all the time he remains mindful. Intention is impermanent, he becomes aware of that. He remains mindful when he talks, when he eats, when he thinks. Whatever he does, he is mindful. Although mindfulness continues to exist even after the full enlightenment. It is arising and passing away, arising and passing away. Continuously, mindfulness is working in the enlightened person's mind. And then, what is the next part of the question?
I think you answered it.
I answered, okay.
Let's see. Why do some traditions translate chitta as the heart instead of the mind?
I think I mentioned this when I was explaining the word chitta. Some people emphasize the emotional part of mind. They divide wisdom and compassion. Wisdom as one and compassion as another. Both are mental states. But chitta, according to the Pali tradition, all emotions are there. Chitta is the faculty of mental state that can think, or that can have a variety of things like picture, and that is what Buddha mentioned even in Anguttara Nikaya. There is nothing more variable than the teacher, nothing more, nothing has so variety than the chitta. Chitta therefore is used for varieties, and one of them can be emotion. Yes. not total emotion, you cannot, or what is the word they use?
Heart?
Heart, yes. Heart is used for emotion. And also some people think the mind is in the heart, uh, and for them, chitta also in the mind. That is not what we can find in the Buddha's teaching. Okay?
Bhante, this is a question I'm sure many people can relate to. If one form of mindfulness practice is enough, in other words, one of the four foundations,
Yeah.
how does one choose which one to practice? Does one choose the one which is easier for him?
Exactly. Exactly, yes. I think I mentioned at some point, Buddha has given thousands of sermons explaining the same Four Noble Truths. Thousands of sermons. He gave so many sermons explaining the same truth because of people's mentality and their temperaments. And therefore, even in choosing a subject for meditation, for mindfulness practice, one must choose oneself a subject that one can follow very easily. I dispute with people who give subjects of meditation. Even in the Buddha's time, only the Buddha gave subjects of meditation for his followers. Even Venerable Sariputta could not give. Even Sariputta was such a great person, very much like the Buddha. He gave a subject of meditation to one of his own disciples. Subject, he was so lustful, he asked him to practice mindfulness of 32 parts of the body. His students' greed or lust increased rather than decreasing by using that. So finally he took him to the Buddha, and Buddha gave him a lotus and put it in front of a lake, stick in the ground, and focus mind on that. By doing so, this young monk saw the flower lotus slowly withering, fading, and falling on the ground. Seeing this, he learned the truth of impermanence. So, like that, only the Buddha was able to give such instruction. So, this is another thing. Pachyatang vetabo vinyoi. This Dhamma is to be realized by oneself. So, one should select one's own subject of meditation for that person to follow very easily. In four foundations of mindfulness, one may use the breath and the first part as a body, Anapanasati Sutta. In Mahasatipatthana, one may use the body or Kaya Anupasana. There are 6 sections. Somebody may select one of those 6 to practice. Then second is Vedana Anupasana, mindfulness of feelings. One may use that section. Or one of those 9 stages of feeling. One may use one. Suppose somebody is very angry, getting angry all the time for no reason. Even meditation person develop anger. Coming out of meditation, he will be very uptight, fighting with people like a fire bomb. So that person must decide to practice metta to overcome that anger. Like this, one must select one's own subject according to one's own mentality and temperaments. That is true.
Bhante. To to wrap up our section on Vedana, we have a question here on feelings. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha states that one abides contemplating feelings as feelings internally. He abides contemplating feelings as feelings externally. How does one contemplate feelings as feelings externally?
I think I mentioned this. Good question. I gave the answer in my talk earlier. Let me repeat that. When you see how feeling arises in you, you have to be very mindful. Very mindful. Pay total attention to the way how feeling arises. Pleasant, unpleasant, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, spiritual, material, and so on and so forth. When that particular feeling arises, you know how it arose. If it is samisa, sukha, dukkha, upekka, and so forth, it arises through with greed, hatred, and delusion, so forth. Similarly, once you have gained this awareness, and that is why we have to start from yourself first and be very competent, be fully aware of it, understand it fully well, realize it, and then you think of how feeling arises in others. Others' feeling does not arise differently. There has to be contact, there has to be attention, there has to be consciousness. Without these factors, no feeling can arise. Definitely contact must arise. And so your feeling arises through contact, others' feeling also arises through contact, depending on contact. And therefore there is no difference between the way feeling arising in you and feeling arising in them. And you see your feeling is not permanent. Similarly, other person's feeling also is not permanent. So if you hold on to your feeling, you develop your greed, or you try to reject your feeling, you develop your anger. Similarly, if the other person try to hold on to that person's feeling, that person will develop greed, and try to reject it, that person will develop anger, and so forth. You can see what is happening in you, and then inferentially you know this is how others also feel, and this is how you know, practice the feeling of others. And then then Ajjat Bahirda. Then you can compare again between your feeling and others. But don't pick one particular person. That is important. If you pick one particular person, instead of developing your feeling, you will develop various other things. Don't pick a person. But generally, you generalize all other living beings have feeling depending on contact, consciousness, and object, exactly as it happens in you. Okay, next question.
Sujata, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
There are some more questions here.
Yes.
These ones?
Yeah.
Yeah, but
About
Yes. Morning, Bhante.
Good
Can
morning.
hear? Morning. Yeah. I just want to
yes.
ask. In the sutta, is there any mention that which method of meditation will enable us easier to attain jhana?
Sutta does not specify which subject of meditation help us to attain jhana, but in commentaries and so forth there are various methods. Buddha invariably mentioned one thing, that is mindfulness of breathing. When you focus the mind on the breath, you can gain concentration. And I think that subject is universal, and the breath you can use for developing your mindfulness as well as concentration. And all the all the factors of enlightenment you can develop from mindfulness of breathing. I the other day when I was talking about the feeling, I said how you develop mindfulness of factor of enlightenment, uh, investigation factor of enlightenment, effort factor of effort of enlightenment, that is then Virya Sampojjhanga, then the enlightened factor of tranquility, enlightened factor of concentration, enlightened factor of equanimity. All these 7 factors of enlightenment you can develop from one subject, feeling. That is the second I picked up because it was related to our mentality and materiality. But in the sutta, if you develop only mindfulness of breathing, you will end up in gaining concentration. That is one of the factors of enlightenment. Mindfulness factor, investigation factor, energy factor, joy factor, tranquility factor, concentration factor, and equanimity factor. All 7 you can develop from the practice of mindfulness of breathing. And similarly, 4 times there are four parts in the mindfulness of breathing. From each part you can develop the 7 factors of enlightenment, one of which is concentration factor. And therefore there is no one such other object Buddha has mentioned. Mahasatipatthana also has that, although it's a very widely spread and more detailed, but mindfulness of breathing discourse is very concise, and therefore I would recommend for anybody to use mindfulness of breathing, use the breath to gain concentration, jhana, even jhanas. Okay, last question.
Bhante, in Parinibbana Sutta, why does Buddha go over the jhanas back and forth and pass away at the 4th jhana?
It is not explained in any particular discourse. Individual can give their own interpretation. My personal interpretation is this, that only in the 4th jhana your mindfulness, equanimity are pure, clean, balanced. When you go to other jhana, higher jhanas, your equanimity is the prominent factor, and you may not be so balanced. You may not be balancing your mindfulness. In the lower than 4th jhana, mindfulness and equanimity are not pure and clean. So he wanted to pass away with mindfulness. Remember in Acharya Abhuta Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya, it is said that the Buddha was conceived in the mother's womb with mindfulness, stayed there with mindfulness, born with mindfulness, lived with mindfulness, and practiced self-mortification with mindfulness, attained enlightenment with mindfulness, lived with mindfulness, and he wanted to pass away with mindfulness, to see exactly exactly how the mind releases from all samsaric commitment together with the ending of this life. That is the life force ending. He wanted to do all this with mindfulness as an example. His entire life was an example to everybody. Mindfulness anybody can attain, but attaining other rupa jhana, arupa jhana and so forth, not some people can attain. But mindfulness, attaining fourth jhana, anybody can attain. And therefore, he wanted to show what we can do. Buddha said, because I never ask you to do anything that you cannot do. I have done it. So, he wanted to do it and set an example even at the last breath. I think for this reason, he attained the fourth jhana and passed away. Friends, very good. Thank you very much for asking all these questions. Keep asking, and we will have our regular talk tomorrow. And finally, I want to do our benediction, wishing all the, as we started this whole series of talks from the middle of March, uh, we want to wish all those who are suffering from COVID-19 virus be free from that and live long with good health. And those who have been suffering from grieving or the passing away of their loved ones, as I mentioned yesterday, when one person dies, many people grieve over that person's death. So there are thousands of people have passed away. In this country itself, 113,000 and so many hundreds passed away. And I believe there may be millions of others who are grieving, and millions of people are affected by the virus, and we want to wish them, those who are grieving and those who are affected by this, be free from their grief and their sickness. And there are many people who are very compassionately, lovingly, with the wholeheartedly, utmost sincerity, trying to help them, like doctors, nurses, and so forth, who even sacrifice, some of them even sacrifice their life, inadvertently, of course, uh, with wonderful attitude towards help them. But unfortunately, some of them have affected and passed away. And yet others continue their wonderful service. May they have strength, courage, determination, and good health to continue their selfless service. And there are others who are trying to find a solution, like finding vaccine. May they be successful as quickly as possible to help these suffering beings. And there are some who are trying to do financially, helping them, and they are wonderful, generous people. And there are leaders who are also, some leaders doing very wonderful job, trying to help and find new solutions, new ways, new methods, new strategies to help these people. And some other leaders may not be that prominent in doing though. They may have some intention, but wisdom is not there. We want them to be wise and courageous, patient, have understanding, determination, with wonderful selfless intention, and may they have wisdom to make right decision. With this, my very sincere wish, and that is the wish we all have, all those who are participating in this have the same wish. And with this wish, we want to conclude this morning session. And once again, thank you very much for coming and participating in this practice. See you.